Oh, yeah, I gotta wait for the.
Yeah. And I just couldn't launch it until I didn't want to interrupt with the other.
It shut down, yeah. Try it again.
Okay, it says there's 2 people logged in. Oh, Perlin has connected along with me. Oh, 11.
Mm.
17. Good. Ann Strike says she can hear us. Right, it looks like on the Zoom feed, it's only going to be showing the person whose mic is actually active at the time.
Okay.
We'll just give it a few more minutes to let people connect, make the switch between meetings. Just give it a few more minutes to let people connect. Glad to see everybody coming in. As we go through the presentation, if you have questions and you're connected to the Facebook meeting, you can type them in the comments. We've got 25 connected to the feed. 25 connections. Many are double people.
Yeah, double people, that sounds like a new sort of fellow person.
It's like the new math. It's how you count Facebook participants. Like an average of 1.2 people per connection, maybe. Yes, conjoined twins. Thanks, Anne. Go turn off the TV in the living room because I can hear it. Hold on. I think we should get Dale to connect so we can all hear Thayer's steel drums. All right, it is now 11 o'clock. Mike, do you think we should go ahead and get started?
Sure.
All right, so thank you everyone for joining us. As David mentioned at the end of the service, this is typically an adult ed that we have following worship on a few Sundays after the packet comes out, a few Sundays before the January regular meeting when we look at the budget, when we approve the budget. And the idea of this meeting is that we want to look at the 2020 final financial report and the 2021 budget and address questions that come in. So if you're connected on the Facebook live meeting, please put your questions in the chat. Mike and Marty, do you guys have access to your email accounts? I'm just thinking if there are people who are watching it on TV, if there's a way for them to submit questions to us.
Yeah. So yes, I do have access to my email account.
So we could do moderator at firstchurchoberlin.org or treasurer at firstchurchoberlin.org. So if you're on the TV connection, but have the ability to email, then you could send a question via email to one of those 2 accounts. Mike, did you want to say anything at the beginning of this about the, let's see, about this part of the packet?
Oh, yeah, sure. I think it's worth a few introductory comments. So I think as everybody knows, we're going through difficult times in terms of being able to come up with a method of holding a congregational meeting. So we thought that the best approach would be to offer the traditional output, which again, you can either access via electronics or have a hard copy delivered. I know hard copies, for example, have already been delivered to folks at Kendall. But in any case, because we can't get together to have a congregational meeting, we thought we'd do the best we could in terms of providing an interactive format via page book where we could, or Facebook, where we would present the budget, allow people to ask questions. And then basically we have then submitted a mail ballot. Our Constitution does allow for a written ballot, to each member of the congregation. So we ask that you look at the materials that have been provided, ask questions, as they appear to you. And again, if you don't get your question out today, via the various media, we'll try and get back to you, so you can always send something to Diana through the office of First Church, directly to me or Marty or Ann Shum, and again, we'll try and get those questions answered. This is more restrictive than the normal full free interactive meetings. We apologize for that, but like all organizations, we're somewhat constrained because of COVID and because of the fact that we don't share and are not always fluent with the multiple electronic platforms. So turn it over to you, Ann, then.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. All right, so I think we're going to begin, by jumping into the final financial reports for 2020. Mike or Marty, if during the course of what I'm saying, you want to add anything, correct anything I say, please feel free to jump right on in. So let's see, this is on page 7 of the packet for the meeting. This is the balance sheet as of December 31st. And I'm just going to draw attention to a few highlights from 2020. And so first of all, I think we want to give major props, kudos to the congregation for strong giving despite the crazy circumstances for 9 months of this year, 9.5 months of this year, where we were operating remotely. And you can see that we did in fact exceed the expected giving for 2020. 2020 was an interesting year also because we had the capital campaign. A lot of that work happened. It's really exciting time to be part of this group. An interesting thing that happened budgetarily is that because of the capital campaign work, there were some items that were part of the 2020 maintenance, operating and maintenance expenses. So you're going to see in our report that there are expenses in the 2020 operating budget that the revenue was actually provided by the capital campaign. So the result of this was that at the end of the year, we had a lower draw from our investments. We expected to have to draw an additional $95,000 out of our investments in order to balance the budget at the end of the year, and we only had to draw $33,000. But that was because $54.2 thousand came out of the capital campaign. Let me see. That is on page 10. Oops. Sorry, trying to navigate between the online version, my notes, the online version, and not trying to make everybody dizzy as I move around. So let's see, at the beginning, you can see that we had only budgeted $276,000 to come in pledges, and we received $303,000. So that's the kudos to the congregation. If we jump then down, and I'm going to go a screen at a time so I don't make you too dizzy, into our expenses for the operating and maintenance, which is down here. So you can see that we spent $68,000 for building improvement and repair, whereas we only budgeted $10,000. But then we brought in that $54,000 from the capital campaign to help offset that. Marty or Mike, do you guys want to say anything about that?
Yeah, and I think it should be pointed out that what we raised was 75,000 in pledges, with a good portion of that being paid during 2020. I think it was around 54,000. So we still expect to receive more of those pledges, that help compensate for the work. And again, the work was emergency work that couldn't have been predicted. The steam line broke, and we had to be able to heat the church. The roofs both failed. We replaced the James Brand roof altogether and did very significant maintenance on the meeting house. So thanks again to the facilities team. Both Pete Richards and Gene Matthews were critical in being able to get this work out there, contracted and completed.
So on line 4.25.090, that is where you see the $54,000 in revenue coming into our operating budget for this year. That came actually out of capital funds.
And I'd like to represent it in a different way. Without those expenses coming in and out of the operating budget, we probably would have come in at 85 expenses at 85% of the budget rather than 100% that you can see on the report, and that is because of the church being shut down for almost an entire year. So it wasn't just the capital campaign income that drove down the additional support that was necessary. It was a fact that we spent a lot less in other areas.
That is definitely true.
Particularly cleaning services.
Right. Yeah, I think that there were a lot of gives and takes. I mean, there were things like our postage was higher than anticipated because typically we can hand out the stewardship letters. Maybe we had less copying because we didn't have bulletins, but maybe we had more copying because we were giving people paper copy. So there's a lot of gives and takes. We didn't have any room rentals all year, so there was a lot that came and went. So 2020 is really just an anomaly year. There's one more thing, a highlight to point out, and that is the stock market performance and the difference that makes for us. When we are calculating the 4.5% contribution that's going to come from our investments to help support the budget each year, what we do is we take a 3-year average of the stock market performance, and that determines the 4.5%. So in 2020 or in 2021, our 4.5% actually is significantly higher than it was for our standard draw from the endowment fund, because the stock market did so well. We will also continue to see that for no matter what happens for the next few years in the stock market, because we use that 3-year average. All right. Of note, on the balance sheet. Marty, can you point me to where the rental house balance sheet item is that has the negative? You're muted.
Oh, it'll be on page 8, and it'll be line 300009, the sanctuary. Oh, that's the sanctuary fund balance, excuse me.
Well, that's a good, so I've made it so that you can actually see
Oh, the
both
rental
on the
house is
screen.
just above that.
Yep. So it's-
300072.
All right, so this is now the things of note from the 2020 budget, or 2020 financial report. That rental house item that you see, the 0.72 and 0.73, those are actually both going to go away from this report in the future. The rental house, of course, has been demolished, razed. I can't remember what the word was we were using, saying that we were going to reclaim what we could from it. But it is now gone, so that will no longer be a part of our balance sheet. We are continuing right now to face expenses to it because we're paying taxes still until Talarex stops billing us for the taxes. We are still having to pay money. The other thing that the rental house going away means for the church is that we will now start to see a refuse line in our operating budget that had previously been applied to the rental house. So the fact that that house is gone does have a few impacts. We're working on how to actually make this line go away so that it's documented appropriately. Since Mike brought it up, the sanctuary fund balance line 3.00.019 has a negative balance as well. And typically negative balances jump out at people on the finance committee. And so what has happened there is the projects that we undertook to make it so that we could house people seeking sanctuary cost more than the money we brought in to pay for it. We had some more extensive plumbing expenses than we anticipated. And so far we have not gotten any additional funds to cover the funds that we spent there. So that's what that negative balance means. Does anybody want to add anything on that one?
Yeah, I believe that, again, pending receipt of any further gifts toward this, that we'll have to close out this debt by basically taking it out of unrestricted funds. So I believe that'll be the next step. So in a future balance sheet, this should be rectified.
Right. And we don't want to see negative balances on this. All right. One thing we just wanted to clarify for everyone is that we have the Cornerstone. Cornerstone is the UCC organization that's helping us finance our work. We initially started our relationship with Cornerstone during the last capital campaign when we needed to open a line of credit to be able to fund the work to replace the roof on the JFO room. In addition to that line of credit, we now have 2 more relationship items with Cornerstone. The second item, so the line of credit is number 1. Number 2 is the bridge loan. So that is what started with this campaign for the future, the current campaign, in order to be able to ensure we had necessary funds to perform the work that is largely done now. The third item that we have with Cornerstone is we have an investment in their programming. So we invested $10,000 in their work so that they can support other UCC projects. In return for us, in return for that $10,000 investment, they gave us a $1,000 grant. And in addition, we now are getting interest from them on that. So you can see that on page 10, line 4.25.013. Just move down. So right here, you can see that we got $1,013.21 in interest from that. So that will be a new line on this report that we'll see each year. Mike or Marty, anything to add on Cornerstone?
I think it's worth bearing out so that people recall when we did the campaign for the future, people made a number of pledges, and the anticipation was that those pledges would be collected over a number of years, and that we would complete the work before we had collected all the pledges. So because of that, getting an equity loan was required in order to have the cash to be able to pay for the various contracted efforts that we engaged in. You'll see later on, so we've taken out about 418,000 in Cornerstone loans to date. And you'll also see that we've got pledges due of about 440,000. So we will require more of the equity fund as we go along, but relatively they're in balance at this point.
Thank you.
And we're still expecting grant money to come as well.
That's
Yes. All right, a couple more things of note. There are a few expense increases that we've run into in 2020. You will see in the benefits area, we did have one staff member's benefits change because that person went from a single person benefit program to a family benefit program. So there was an increased expense on that we anticipate to have continue. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of standard office supplies that are more expensive as long as we're in the pandemic. Postage, office supplies, copy minute expenses, etc. In 2020, we also needed a new laptop. And because we're doing everything via internet now, we needed a faster internet connection. There were a few expenses that only happened in 2020. So we had both water and sewer were higher than anticipated because we had a problem down in the basement that has been resolved, but resulted in higher water and sewer bills as water drained straight into the sewer. And then, of course, as we mentioned earlier, all of those capital campaign projects, that's only going to happen in 2020. We'll benefit from them moving ahead. And then the final note I have on 2020 is that we are now receiving our credits for our solar array. Marty or Mike, is there anything else you would like to comment on in the 2020 financial report of note?
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out that we are now receiving regular steam bills from the college. So if you reach back a few years where we would have a budget and not spend anything, we had said that would change this year. So we have an agreement in place and those bills are coming in on a regular basis. Gene, again, and the facilities team has done a great job in terms of improving the heating system in the James Brand house. It's no longer the sweatshop that we previously operated. So I think we're on a much better efficiency basis. Plus the work of adding insulation, adding LED lighting, and a number of things should have beneficial impact on both our heating bills and our electrical bills as we go in the future.
Very good point. Marty?
I would like to point out that although we exceeded pledges in 2020, we've also received a lot of donations from non-members across the country, I suppose, from even non-members, and we did well altogether in contributions. However, because we don't have an offering plate, we did not do as well in special offerings such as Neighbors' Needs and our church's wider one great hour sharing and so forth. Strength of the church.
And that is a real concern. I think when we gather in person as a congregation with visitors, for example, on Christmas, and you pass the plate, people have a tendency to reach into their wallet and put into the plate. When we're meeting electronically, it just doesn't happen as easy. So we talked about this both on finance, on the EC, and I know the stewardship committee. There doesn't appear to be a real easy solution other than to make people aware of it and make the appeals. But it's just hard to reach into your wallet and throw the cash at the screen. It just doesn't work that way. You have to do something, write a check, or go to a website. And Marty has provided, by the way, websites where people can make those donations. But it's not a problem. We're aware of it, but we don't have a good fix.
Yep. I think this was we had budgeted, so these special purpose offerings, it's cash comes in, cash goes out. So whatever the congregation gives, that's our giving. And so I think we budgeted 12,000, but I think it was only about 5,800 or 6,700. That's what it is. So just over half of what we had anticipated. So yes, this is a challenge that we haven't figured out how to overcome. Anything else? I'm not seeing any questions. I did see somebody saying, it's difficult to read because this PDF is blurry. So Ann Sprague has posted the link to the PDF on the church's website. I could switch to looking at it in Excel when we get to the budget, if that's going to help, but the PDF itself is a little on the blurry side. Did you guys get any questions by email?
I'll have to check out and check, so be back.
I did not.
All right, let's switch over to the 2021 budget. So I'm going to page 18 in the packet. Computer doesn't like me jumping like that. So just a note, there are several things in the budget where you will find that there are highlights in the PDF that you have. And those highlights meant that there was something odd about that entry that the finance committee doesn't want to forget about. Typically, it's the amount budgeted in 2020 was usually double what is in 2021. And that's because we don't anticipate being back in person. So things like room rentals, Wednesday night supper, travel expenses, Kendall Fellowship, Choral Scholars, etc., are all things that we don't anticipate either having the expense at the full year level or the revenue at the full year level. And so we want to budget appropriately for 2021 with what we anticipate having. But at the same time, when it comes to do the 2022 budget, if we see 100% increase, we don't want to be shocked as to why that's happening. So that's what these highlights throughout the document mean. In addition, there were other expenses that were budgeted in 2020 that were not expended. So we don't need to budget it again in 2021. So things like the mission trip, the winter retreat. So the church puts aside money for it that is sitting allocated for that purpose. So we don't need to allocate it again in 2021. So again, trying to be prudent for this year's budget, but at the same time, not lose track that we did that when it comes time to budget next year. That's what all those highlights mean. Also of note, employees, the personnel committee determined what the cost of living increase was, and as recommended by the UCC, our salary increases for our staff members do match the UCC recommendation, and so we are still in alignment with them. We also wanted to make sure that for our office manager position, since the UCC doesn't give us guidelines on that, we surveyed some of the area businesses to find out what a comparable position would be paid with them, and we are in line with that. And then the final big note that I have is about pledges. And you will hear the Finance Committee talk about this every year, and probably outreach and service as well. It is absolutely critical that when we make our budget for 2021, we have received all of the pledges for our next year's operating budget. Whatever this pledge number is, that impacts how much our outreach and service committee can give away in the discretionary giving. I think that's on, no, it was on 21, sorry. Oh, it must be on 22. Let me see what page it's on.
It's below CE.
Okay, so that's on page 20. Okay, so this discretionary amount that the Outreach and Service Committee can distribute on our behalf is 20% of what has been pledged. So if you are a firm believer in giving our wealth to causes that are important to our congregation, it is critical that you get your pledge in. Changes to the pledge amount impact both this 56,483 number, as well as back on the first page of the budget, the additional transfer from the parsonage fund. That's the green line. So if we increase our level of pledges, that also increases the amount that we have to give away. So that's a plus and a minus. And then the net difference we'll see as an increase in or decrease in our transfer from the parsonage fund. So you can't just say, I'm going to donate $5,000 and that will reduce this by $5,000, because there's also an additional expense on the benevolence side. Is there anything that Marty or Mike, you want to specify about either that or other questions?
I think it's worth noting kind of the philosophy that went into this budget. We basically assumed that the first half of the year we're still shut down. We're hopeful of being able to open up sometime after July 1st, maybe in the fall. But I think, as everybody knows, it's going to depend on many, many factors that are outside of our control. So as Ann pointed out, in some cases, we assumed a half-year operation. And then we have to remind ourselves, by the way, in the next year, some of those will come back and be double what they are in the current year. So there's things like that in the budget. We also asked our committees and the various groups of the church to think about how we run this program in the current climate. So there will occasionally be additional expenses this year, for example, to improve our audio visuals, and to make better use of the software programs. I think whatever we do when we come back, I believe there'll be a service that'll be provided on Facebook or some other platform. We'll certainly, continue that. But there are many, many unknowns. And I think we've done the best, with what we could. With respect to maintenance, we think we've hit a lot of the big items, but we should never pretend in a church with our age that there won't be some, assets that will simply require repair and maintenance. So I know the doors on the Undercroft, the doors to the James Brand cellar are items, that need to be fixed. But we think we've hit a lot of the major stuff. Maintenance on the meeting house roof will continue. I think on an annual basis, we're going to have to plan on the replacement of slates. But again, that's been captured in the budget. So, Marty, anything else there?
He shook his head no.
Okay.
Okay, so we do have a few questions that have come in the Facebook comments. So first, we have a comment from John Elder that says, we had less expense, but the needs of our special offering recipients has been greater. Because there were no pew envelopes for contributions, our special purpose offerings were about half of the usual amount. Will we compensate for this in any way? Then he went on, the upgrading of the undercroft will prove to be useful for future functions, so it is appropriate to transfer funds to cover the balance. Then I guess Diana Steele asked Marty specifically, can you address John Elder's question?
Okay, which question?
So about, I guess, pulling the funds from the investments. So I guess it's about compensating for the lower contributions.
To special offerings, there's no plan in place to make up the difference, so to speak, in special offerings. We just hope we do it better this year in making that appeal and making it easier for people to give. And there was another question.
Sorry, I'm answering one of the questions, which is the email domain, is firstchurchoberlin.org. So I think his other was a comment, and that is upgrading the undercroft will prove to be useful. So it's appropriate to transfer funds to cover the balance. So I think that was something Mike said, that we would likely, in order to cover the balance in the sanctuary fund, we would transfer funds from the endowment to cover that.
We've asked the sanctuary team if there's any additional pledges or gifts, out there, but failing that, I think we need to, close out the activity. I think there's a larger challenge, the sanctuary movement, in terms of where we are now is something that, both as a team and as a congregation, we need to look to see how we can support the needs of immigrants and what that's going to look like in the future. So what we thought we were going to do and where we're going are probably different paths at this point.
And with regard to the rental house balance, the executive council in its last meeting approved transferring funds from the parsonage down fund to zero that account out. Basically, it's slightly under $10,000.
I did get a question on benefits. I think Ann spoke a little bit about one of the points of that budget. It's a little bit difficult to understand budget to what's actually taking place. We had a bit of an overlap this year between Brandy leaving and Jen joining. I believe there was 1 month of where we were paying salary and benefits for each of those parties. And again, this simply is what it is. As you hire people, if they're single, you're going to pay a certain level of benefits. If they're a family unit, you pay more benefits. And that's certainly something we don't screen folks to. We try and find the best person for the spot. We come up with a competitive salary, and the benefits are what they are. So hopefully that answers that question.
All right, still scrolling down in the comments. I see Marcy did ask about the email, and so it is moderator@firstchurchoberlin.org. Then John has a comment that says, I suggest that to compensate for the diminished special purpose offerings in 2020, this is 6,000 be used from Margaret Leonard and or Martha Stacy funds, so from their investments, on a pro rata basis to the recipients. So John is suggesting that we take $6,000 from our investments to make up for the lower special offerings in 2020?
So I think that's a question that the executive council can probably take up. So John, I'll just add that to the agenda for next month. That'd be probably the easiest way. If we haven't resolved that, the next time we have a congregational meeting or a vote, we could certainly consider that in the April or May, time frame to resolve it one way or the other. So we've taken a note and we'll follow up on that.
Very good. Laurel Price Jones has inquired about whether we are considering applying for the PPP round 2 funding. Mike, do you want to address that one?
Yeah, last spring, and I believe this took place when we were transitioning from the old executive council to the new executive council. Marty and I came in and made a proposal to make an application for the PPP loans, which at the time looked as though, although not all the rules were issued, where we could obtain a loan and then based upon meeting the requirements of the act, the loan would at some point be forgiven. We had I would say a fairly difficult conversation because I think there was a lack of understanding at that time as to what was this program, what were the risks associated with it, what were the requirements in terms of asking, for money from the state in terms of what they might, require for a church. So at the time, the council, after the deliberation, determined that we didn't think it was appropriate for First Church to look for that. Now, again, we've been through the first generation. There's now, I think, a better understanding of what took place. I think at the time I had asked, and I know David Hill can get back to us again, we wanted to know what our peers within the UCC were doing with respect to either asking for or not asking for these funds. So again, I think we've got 9 months of track record, and certainly we can approach that question again. Laurel, I will add that to the agenda for the executive council in the next meeting, and we can certainly raise that question again.
I'll add that agenda item in front of his executive council came at the request of the finance committee. It was voted and approved in that committee. And I think the general feeling in the executive council was that there were more deserving small businesses, especially, that we wanted to make sure that those small businesses got a piece of the pie, and that our church could take care of itself, basically.
Yeah, I think the perception, and probably this changed otherwise, that to some extent, these were emergency funds and we were jumping in line in front of other people that needed it more. I believe what I've read is that not all the available funds were actually utilized in the first round. So that actually wasn't the case. I don't think we knew or fully understood that at the time.
Well, and the other thing that I don't think finance recognized at that time was you could get in line for the funds and it could be a loan as opposed to a grant. So you wouldn't have to apply for forgiveness if you thought that some others would benefit from having the funds available. So I think that there's so much more information available now. I think that it is important to have the executive council contemplate again.
Yeah. And Ann, if you want to have the finance committee peruse that and make a recommendation again, we'll certainly listen.
Yeah, I think my nonprofit organization's application for round 2 was going in Friday. So
There's a good example.
Exactly. All right. There have been a few questions about what the parsonage fund is. I'm assuming this is David answered it in the comments, but just because I did get a text about it as well, I figure we should bring this to the attention of the people who are only seeing it on TV in case that question exists at Kendall, for instance, as well. The parsonage fund is our investment that came into being when John Elder was pastor and they sold the parsonage. So when that home was sold, that created an influx of cash that was invested. And so the idea is that those funds are used to help provide housing for our new pastors, but then also build the investment for the church that can help support our operating budget. Marty or Mike, do you want to add anything to that description of what the parsonage fund is?
Yeah, I think we focus on the parsonage fund from a year-to-year basis as compensating for housing for our, our minister. But I think in a larger perspective, when you look at all our funds, a portion of which are restricted and a portion of which are unrestricted, I believe that total fund basis, a portion of that is available to help the work of the church. And in effect, what we've been doing, because our giving is typically less than our budget needs, is that we've had to withdraw more than is what is recommended. Now, I think we have this discussion every year, and you'd almost think, after 7 consecutive years, for example, of having a discussion like this, wouldn't we be bankrupt? Well, what happens is that the parsonage fund will gradually decrease, but as we get bequests, gifts, from other folks, the unrestricted funds have gone up. So the net balance sheet, if you look at it from a year-to-year basis, has actually stayed the same or grown depending upon what we're spending on capital needs. So we're not going bankrupt. If we continue this way and we don't receive gifts and bequests, we will go, we'll empty out that fund eventually. So it's something that we constantly need to be aware of. It's something that does cause concern, but it's basically a fact of life with a congregation that is, for the most part, retired, living on fixed income. But whereas a number of us have the assets are more significant than the income coming in. So that's kind of finance, with a congregation with the age and mix that we currently have. So it's prudent for us to look at it. Again, because of the fact that our gifts are less than our expenses, we're going to have to find, a source to fund that. And we've been traditionally taking that out of the parsonage fund.
And I'll add that the original intention of the parsonage endowment fund was to support the minister's housing allowance, which is $24,000 per year. So obviously we're exceeding that with the parsonage endowed fund. It is one of the largest endowed funds in the endowment, in the total endowment. And when we draw 4.5%, that's coming from all funds. When we particularly target the parsonage fund, it's just targeting that fund. Yeah. However, I'll mention that our investments grew at about 10.5% in 2020, which impacts all those funds, including the parsonage fund. So in spite of us taking over and above the 4.5% draw from that fund and other funds, or from that fund, for instance, it is still relatively stable as far as what it was at the very beginning. Yeah, obviously, to Mike's point, we can't do that forever. But
so, do you want me to let's see on the next page down? We do have included right at the end of the balance sheet on page 9. This is a copy of. This is the 3rd quarter. Is that right, Marty? It says 3rd quarter up here, but I think this is 4th quarter report.
It's a 4th quarter.
Okay, so ignore the typo there.
Quarter.
So this is the investment report that the finance committee looks at. And so we're working out our balance between the funds to ensure that we match our policy. But you can see that we do have strong performance. So 1.8 million as of the fourth quarter. We have another comment from Laurel. This is going back to the PPP loans topic. Our comment is, I don't think there was any geographical distribution of PPP funds. Giving to one organization in Oberlin did not limit funding to others. If it allowed us to give more money away, it would be a benefit to the Oberlin community. And Diana says 100% agree with this sentiment. If we are able to provide and receive funds because we are better able to navigate the bureaucracy, we can help others in need. And Rebecca added, agreed, Laurel, at the time and with the information available, EC felt strongly about this decision. If finance would like to make another recommendation, EC can revisit it. So I will promise that finance will consider this at our next meeting. Are there other questions? Anybody have anything by email or text or carrier pigeon?
Again, that questioning doesn't have to end today. You can certainly get to us and we'll get back to you by whatever means.
Laurel added one more comment on this. I probably don't need to say that among the first recipients were huge organizations, law firms, etc. We'd certainly do a better job of making something good come from the program. Yes.
Amen.
One other thing of note in the report, Mike, I don't know if you want to make some comments about the summary.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Do you want to pull that up?
Yep.
Okay.
So
what I wanted to do here, because the funds that supported our capital efforts have come from a number of sources. And this has a history. I think Ann Shum was key to this when we did the first Not For Us Alone campaign. But there were bequests. There was the Campaign for the Future. We did a supplemental campaign request. We got funding from the state of Ohio and the National Trust. So we've come close to raising almost $2.2 million over that period of time. And then what I did was I've captured the expenses, that started with some conceptual efforts, some detailed designs. There was a fair amount of architecture up front, but there's also, I think, a repair to the fellowship hall at that time. And perhaps even the installation of the solar panels might have come out of this, or was that an earlier?
Ready?
Well, that's a memory. But in any case, the work that has been done is largely complete. The only things that we're waiting for at this point are a couple of fixtures, lighting fixtures, to be installed by Burgess sometime over the next couple of weeks. The crown, I believe, has been fabricated, and the railings on the front steps, but they have not been installed. So it's the installation of the lights, the installation of the crown, and the installation of the railing. And basically, we've completed the scope of work that was approved by the congregation. So it's been a long, long road. Huge amount of thanks has to go out to Gene Matthews, and many others that that have helped along the way to work with each of these contractors. And thanks for the many folks that came out and volunteered at various times. We did come a little bit over budget, and I think we are aware of that. And our problem is that in the midst of construction, one has to make an improvement to a change, and sometimes they're simply necessitated. So the big items is we walked through the meeting house with the fire chief, and we noticed that our emergency signage was either missing or poorly coordinated, or different colors and different standards. So we basically took that as an opportunity to correct that signage, and that was fairly expensive. We did the discovery of the lack of insulation in the kitchen and the JFO room. We certainly added that. When we did the security alarms, we found that we had to add some additional alarms and sensor replacements that we hadn't expected. And there was about $10,000 of additional work because of increased asbestos removal. We had hoped to contain the asbestos in places by putting a Luan floor over it, but we found we had to actually grind it down and get rid of it. So that work was actually done. And then there are a handful of other structural and threshold issues that we fixed. So I'm very pleased. And again, it's something that we can come together and celebrate. The folks like Laurel and Bill Barlow, and that were involved in raising these funds. And I know, Ann, you were part of the earlier efforts, and many others. It's just been spectacular to get us where we are today. So I wanted to give kind of a broad view so that people could see where we are and where we end up.
I think I appreciate you going through that. And I think that in addition to just providing relevance, I think it is important to note that this has impact for the congregation in relation to the mail-in ballot that we all will be receiving, because we need to make sure that because of the way things happened, everybody understands what you're voting on. So this work that was already done, but because we didn't have meetings, haven't had the chance to vote on them. So when you get your ballot, and this is on page 3 of the packet, this can explain what Mike was just talking about and where you need to vote. Anything else on that one from either of you? I've got a few more comments. Okay, this is going back to PPP. Carla added clarification that PPP funds have to be verified what they are used for, which is for the survival of the business, not giving away funds. And then Diana clarified it can be used to pay salaries.
Yeah, if we did it, it would be basically to pay salaries, which is the easiest to control and document. I doubt that we'd be, using it for anything else. It is possible, I believe, to pay for some overhead, but I think salaries is a direct expense that's easy to document and follow through. We were concerned at the time, that the only types of folks that would use this were people that were, say, facing bankruptcy. But I think the correct way to look at the PPP program is as a stimulus package. And, as a congregation, we do face an unknown future. We really don't know post-COVID what things are going to look like. We have a shortfall in giving, as we speak. It could get worse. There are risks. The future is somewhat unknown. So I think it's worth exploring programs like this. Again, we need to look at the details and make sure that it's consistent with our mission, and it doesn't put unacceptable restrictions on us as a church. But we can investigate that, and we'll certainly follow through.
Right. Yes, Laurel just added to that if we could use it for salaries, it could free up some of the drawdown from the endowment that could be used for giving. So, and I think going back to John's point earlier, that there's probably more need than ever. So we could almost make the case for, we're going to draw it down because we're going to give it away. So we'll see.
Modern math.
That's right. Hey. And going to the special offerings, Carl, the chair of our Outreach and Service Committee, noted that the committee is trying to come up with more effective ways to raise funds for special offerings going forward. And they're definitely interested in suggestions. All right. Number one, are there any more questions? Anything by email? One thing I think we should comment on, and this is, before I was on finance, I was on stewardship. So as Mike indicated, one of the best things that we can do as a congregation is continuing our giving. And one of the important ways of doing that as dedicated members of this congregation is to include the church in your estate plans. We have a program at First Church called the Finney Tent Society. And so please do pursue including the church in your estate plans and help us continue the life of this church going beyond even our own lives. I'm just waiting to see like what my next committee is. So that was stewardship hat, finance hat. Is there anything else we wanted to discuss today? I did get a text saying that we want to make sure that if you have not paid your pledge yet for capital campaigns, it is important that we continue to receive those funds, as Mike pointed out. So if you have questions about your statement, you should be receiving things from the church really 3 times a year, statements from the church saying where your funds are going. So you make sure that they match your records. If there's anything, any problem, you can always get in touch with me as chair of finance or Diana in the office. Any other questions or comments? Last call before we all break for lunch. All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you, everyone. I hope
Thank
you
you very
enjoy the
much.
rest of your Sunday.